Hey guys, Epidemic 2020 here. Man, that screen name did not age well. Maybe I'm a prophet, who knows? Anyway, I made this video where I was trying to talk about classical foundationalism and offer a critique of it with one of my friends, and I figured I'd go ahead and share that video with you guys. But let me give you a little bit of background as to what's going on in the video. So I'm criticizing classical foundationalism, which is this idea made really popular by guys like Rene Descartes, where they seek to figure out something you can be absolutely certain about, and they use that as the foundation or the starting point by which they try and gain other knowledge. But they're searching for, at the very beginning, something they can know with certainty. And what I'm arguing is that classical foundationalism makes a big mistake in searching for a starting point that is absolutely certain. They miss the actual starting points. And instead of finding the actual foundational starting points, they end up instead trying to start at beliefs that just so happen to be, that we are very confident end up being true. And there are big consequences to misunderstanding what the actual starting points are. So here's the video. Hello, I want to make a quick video explaining my objections to classical foundationalism. All right, so here's the starting point we both seem to agree on. Knowledge is justified true belief, or JTB for short. So if you have justified true belief, then you have knowledge. Now, this next part's going to sound like gibberish to most people that end up listening to this, but classical foundationalism, the central claim that they make is that properly basic beliefs must be something like incorrigible or self-evident. Now, all that's really meaning to say is a properly basic belief means a starting point that is proper or rational. So the only starting point they're going to accept are beliefs that are incorrigible. Now, incorrigible is actually a really cool concept. It means any belief that becomes true simply because you believe it. And an example of this would be something like, I feel pain. I feel pain, it's automatically true. If you're dreaming, it's still true that you felt pain. If you're in the real world, it's still true. If you're in the matrix, it still makes sense. Even if you're a brain in a vat, the phrase, I feel pain, ends up becoming true simply because you felt it. So this is the type of claim that is automatically true. It's automatically justified because you had direct experience of it. And it's a belief. So it is a justified, true belief. That means it counts as knowledge. So skepticism has been defeated here. That's actually a good observation that the classical foundationalist makes. Where I get into trouble with classical foundationalism is I think that in narrowly defining properly basic beliefs as things that have to be incorrigible, they've made the definition too narrow. And it's so narrow, in fact, that you can't build the rest of the house upon such a narrow foundation. So that's what I'm going to be contending, that if you believe that the only properly basic beliefs end up being things that are incorrigible, then you're going to end up being unable to have rational belief in anything that is inferentially justified. So anything that requires evidence in order to be believed, which is all of science. So if you end up sticking to classical foundationalism, you won't be able to rationally believe that gravity exists, right? Even though it clearly does. All right, so let's see the issues in play. Now, there's a way to dodge it. If you just expand the definition of properly basic a bit, then all the problems go away. But that would mean you're no longer a classical foundationalist. All right, so here's my view, and then we'll get into the argument. I think that all of these things on the screen are actually examples of properly basic beliefs. That other minds exist, that you're not a brain in a vat, that the external world is real, that you're not always stuck in a dream, that you're not in the matrix, that you're not tricked by an evil demon, that the past wasn't created 5 minutes ago with the appearance of age and all your memories are implanted, that you're not currently insane. Right? And these things can all be simplified into one of three categories. So your senses are generally reliable, your cognitive abilities are generally reliable, and your memories are generally reliable. These things are actually what makes inferences possible. They're the tools we use to gain evidence. All evidence is either something that comes from our senses, like the reason I believe in gravity is because I can see it, I'm using my senses, or I'm using my cognition, my ability to reason, or I'm using my memory. Those are the only tools by which we are able to give things justification. So if these aren't included on your list of properly basic beliefs, it's going to cause you some problems, as I'm going to show with the following example. Anytime you make a claim, there are going to be things that you take for granted, assumptions built into the claim. So the first example of an argument we're going to look at here is that Aaron's Facebook argument was incorrect. Right? So you look at a Facebook argument for a guy named Aaron, you say that's incorrect. Well, when you make a claim like that, there are claims more foundational to that are being assumed. For example, you're assuming that Aaron actually exists and that Facebook actually exists. Now, a foundationalist, the way they approach these arguments is they're saying if the foundation isn't correct, then the rest of the house doesn't make sense to make that correct either. So for example, you can't believe, if you don't have a rational reason to believe that Facebook exists, then you can't possibly have a rational reason to think that Aaron's Facebook argument was incorrect. Right? The existence of Facebook arguments depends as a prerequisite for the existence of Facebook. All right, but here's the kicker. Every single claim from Facebook exists to gravity exists has the same set of things taken for granted. And that is one of these three claims: that my senses are generally reliable, that my cognitive abilities are generally reliable, and that my memories are generally reliable. It is impossible to make any inference, any claim that rests on evidence without relying on my memories or my cognition or my senses, because those are what can confer justification. Those are what give us evidence. All right, so here's why this is a problem for a classical foundationalist. It is impossible to justify the claim my senses are generally reliable, or my cognitive abilities are generally reliable, or my memories are generally reliable in the typical way. You can't offer evidence for those things because those are the things that give us evidence. You can't give me sensory data to try and prove that my sensory data is reliable. That would be arguing in a circle. My senses, they could give me a false positive, right? If I was in the matrix and my senses were all mistaken, my senses would still tell me you're not in the matrix. If I was dreaming, my senses would still tell me you're awake. Right? So I can't trust my senses to prove my senses. That would be a circular argument. So I can't offer justification for my senses in an inferential way. It would always be a circular argument. So the only option left is to use non-inferential justification. But the classical foundationalist says that these three claims cannot be non-inferentially justified unless they're incorrigible. And neither of these examples are incorrigible. So from their perspective, these are not properly basic. They are not basic. They are basic claims, but they're not proper. They're not rational to be believed. Well, if you can't believe that your memories are reliable, then you can't believe, or that your senses are reliable, you can't believe that Facebook actually exists. The reason you believe in Facebook is because you're relying on the testimony of your memories of Facebook, or your direct experience with Facebook while you're typing on the computer, or you're thinking of some argument that you gave to say Facebook is real. But if you can't access those three things, you have no reason to think that Facebook is real. If you have no reason to think Facebook is real, you have no reason to think that Aaron's argument on Facebook was incorrect. So it undermines your ability to know anything inferentially based. If you're going to keep the definition very narrow, your foundation is going to be cracked. You're not going to be able to build on it. You're going to be able to believe things, to know things actually, like I feel pain, I exist, and I have thoughts. Classical foundationists can know those things, but they cannot know things like gravity is true. That is an inference. And in this instance, it's an unjustified or irrational inference because they've made their standard, their criteria of what makes a thing properly basic so narrow.